very, very good. Now, sopranos, note at bar 187, where you have the staccato marks, would you please take out the slur and write accents?
The Washington Cathedral Choral Society is practicing for its 50th anniversary concert. The Verdi Requiem is the same piece which the Choral Society sang at its first concert exactly 50 years ago. Much has happened outside the Washington National Cathedral walls during those 5 decades. History, as well as music, resonates in the stone and glass of this cathedral. It may be the same music as 50 years ago, but it is not the same chorus, not the same cathedral, not even the same city. All have changed. The chorus, the cathedral, and the city have each, in their own ways, come of age. Pre-World War II Washington was a quiet, almost sleepy city. It looked more like a southern town than a world capital. The business of Washington, government, was booming in the 30s. White marble columns sprouted everywhere. Construction was proceeding above the city too, but slowly. Begun in 1907, Washington Cathedral, by the late 30s, was far from complete, but it had an organ and a small choir of men and boys. In 1939, it needed a musician to run both. Paul Calloway of Grand Rapids, Michigan, was 30 when he became organist choirmaster, September 1st, 1939. It was the same day that Hitler invaded Poland. Perhaps it was the excitement of coming to Washington. Perhaps it was his youth. Paul Calloway decided within a year that another singing group was required.
Well, I felt that as one of the most important capitals in the world, and certainly one of the most beautiful church buildings in the world, it deserved to have a large group of men and women singers, as well as its wonderful choir of men and boys.
A 20-year-old music student named Richard Wayne Dirksen became Calloway's assistant.
I was studying at Peabody at the time, and Paul had come over there and auditioned 3 of us and selected me to come and begin work with him here at the cathedral.
Both men were from the Midwest, but the Washington music scene was more provincial than they expected.
There was nothing in the way of major music except the Snow Concert Bureau, which brought in outside artists, and the then growing symphony orchestra, which probably had 56, 60 players, some of them part-time, and that's all there was.
Nobody was sure if bureaucrats and politicians could sing. The recruiting poster was more a question than an announcement. 150 singers did show up in the great choir of the cathedral on December 1st, 1941. They began to rehearse the Verdi Requiem. Six days later, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The Verdi Requiem was performed on schedule on May 13th, 1942. The next day, Paul Calloway packed his bags and went to war. That war transformed Washington because it precipitated another invasion, the invasion of war workers. The city became, as the title to this wartime film suggests, Boomtown, D.C. As the war workers arrived, Washington began to lose some of its provinciality. One person to see the effect of this growth on the city's musical life was impresario Patrick Hayes.
Now consider the year of 1942 with this tremendous invasion of new, bright young people who had sung in church choirs back home, had sung in college glee clubs, and they were singers and trained. There was a waiting list at Paul Calloway. It must have been dozens and even hundreds long.
One of the talented newcomers to Washington was a baritone and the future music critic of the Washington Post, Paul Hume.
I came to Washington in 1942. Paul Calloway had already been drafted and was serving on an island in the South Pacific, and he came back in 1945. I was told by friends of his that when he got back to Washington and came out to the cathedral, that one day he walked all around the cathedral, inside and out, what was then built, and said that there were times, or had been times, when he wondered if he would ever see this place again.
I was certainly feeling glad to be back and be in this wonderful place making music again.
Paul Calloway now moved the Choral Society out of the great choir into the main part of the cathedral. The nave was still incomplete. Calloway had a large chorus, but as yet no grand space in which to perform major choral works. The war transformed Washington into the capital city of the most powerful country in the world. Yet in some respects, Washington had not changed. Racial segregation still persisted. The Cathedral Choral Society, well before the Civil Rights era, was one of the first in Washington to showcase black artists through its Young Singers program. Adele Addison gave her first Washington performance in January 1953. She would later perform with most major symphonies and operas across the country. The following year, Todd Duncan performed with Paul Calloway in William Walton's Belshazzar's Feast.
Well, he wouldn't have asked me to have sung, to be the artist that day, if he didn't have that in his blood and in his mind and in his soul. And we never said anything about race. Not one word did we ever say that you are white and I'm black, or I'm black and you're white. We never said that. We were two sons of God that were serving the poet, obeying the poet, and serving those beautiful words of Belshazzar's Feast. That's what we were doing.
In later years, artists of the stature of Kathleen Battle would perform early career showcases with the Cathedral Choral Society. Sometimes young artists sang as unknowns in the cathedral, becoming famous only later. Paul Hume remembers one day when the Howard University Choir was practicing in the cathedral.
But they were singing on some occasion in the choir of the cathedral, and this voice soared out over the rest of the choir. And when it was over, I said, "Who is that soprano?" And they said, "It's a girl named Jessie Norman. She's 18 years old."
I heard Jessie Norman at the Metropolitan Opera auditions and was very impressed with her, and asked her to sing with us, and she graciously agreed to do so.
Jessie Norman would soon be recognized as one of the world's great sopranos. Her 1968 performance of Handel's Messiah in Constitution Hall is one of the high points in the history of the Cathedral Choral Society. Other moments were far less glorious.